Hello? Like mic? Better? Mic? No mic? Mic. All right. Okay, that's good. I think we can slowly start. So I have like a small introduction on the room itself and the Open Source Firmware Foundation. I tried to ASCII art Open Source Firmware Foundation, so in case you cannot read it, because you cannot read it, it says Open Source Firmware Foundation, right? With a little bit of fantasy, you kind of get it. And yeah, so it's our third time here at COSCUP. So actually we're from Germany, so we flew like half of the world to be here, right? And COSCUP is always nice and great, so I think we will maybe attend next year again. All right, so the schedule for today. So first off, I will talk a little bit about the current state of open source firmware in terms of what projects are there, what's the support for different vendors, where's the industry kind of trending to. And after that, we have Daniel from Firmware, the laptop company, and he talks about open software on an open convertible laptop. And after that, we have Richard, who talks about exploring firmware level security for AMD SCV SNP. And then we have like a bigger lunch break going on. And after that, we have Ansheng from ARM, who talks about OpenBMC and host SoC communication. We got Zamba from MyTech, who's talking about server system firmware. With open source, so actually what they're doing right now. We got Marvin afterwards from 9 Elements, who's talking about tracing embedded system for holistic debugging. And to finish it off, we have Alan, and he's talking about how to do cross debugging on OpenBMC and the Yocto project. So you can find all of that also in the HackMD notes that are in the schedule linked, right? So both that talk and the introduction here, and actually my other talk as well. I depulled it into Mandarin. I don't know if that's correct. Right? There's also a translation, but that's also DeepL translated, right? So, okay, so a little bit on the Open Source Firmware Foundation. So, what we're doing and who we are. So, essentially, our mission is to promote, support, educate, and advocate open source firmware, right? So, what that means is more or less we are traveling around the world, talking about open source firmware. We are supporting open source firmware projects, either through giving them, a little bit space for marketing and these kind of things, but also for funding. We help industry partners, companies, get to use open source firmware and all these kind of things, right? So more or less, we want to strengthen the whole open source firmware ecosystem and want to promote open source firmware as the solution to replace the traditional, proprietary solutions. That's kind of the leadership of the foundation. So I'm one of the founders, and I'm on the board right now, and I have a couple of other people that are there. So it's not just me or just like 2 or 3 people. We are I think 10 plus people now that run the foundation and that are kind of connected to the foundation and help us spread the word about it. A couple of things that we're doing right now. There was a talk yesterday on the European Cyber Resilience Act. That's like an initiative from the European Union that will enforce security and maintainability on firmware as well, so software in general, but firmware is part of that. And we have an initiative running that kind of talks about what's the impact on open source firmware on that one. We do have an annual conference, the Open Source Firmware Conference. It's in October. It will be in the US. If you cannot afford it, which most likely might be the case. We normally have scholarships running, so we support students and hackers to actually get to the conference. We normally give out something like 8 to 10 scholarships a year, so paying for everything more or less, right? So we pay for flights, hotel tickets, and so on and so forth. This is coming out of sponsorships money that we get through the conference. So this year the scholarship call is already done, and we already selected people. But for next year, if you're interested in learning, more about open source firmware, you can check out the Open Source Firmware Conference, and you can check out the scholarship call, right? So you can apply for that. There's like, I don't know, you write like half a page on, your motivation or why you want to be at Open Source Firmware Conference. And then maybe or maybe not, we pay for it, right? So normally we get like 15 to 20 applications, so chances are pretty high that if you apply for it, you also get a seat on that one. And yeah, the last thing, we also have a funding call going on, so we're giving out a little bit of money. So we're not a big foundation, so we only have a couple of companies that support us, so we don't have a lot of money, but we have a little bit of money, and we're actually giving that out. So if you're working on, a project that is kind of around open source firmware, either on open source firmware directly or, tooling around it or whatever, you can actually apply for that. I think I have a separate slide for that as well. Yeah, first, so a couple of projects that are under the foundation. So, Korbut, Orbut are, or like, let's say all the top projects are under the foundation umbrella, right? So they are part of the Open Source Firmware Foundation. Of course, we support every open source firmware project, but if you sign up as a project for us, you get a couple of benefits on, more funding. We pay for infrastructure and this kind of stuff, right? Right. So the funding call again. So it also closed end of July. We're giving out 5K per project, right? So if you apply for a project, you want to work on something, 5K is like the maximum budget that you can get from us, just because we don't have so much money, but still we're giving that out. The next call will be starting in October. So if you got anything that you want to work on, you can actually get, a little bit of money out of that, that helps you, maybe. And we're focusing on everything that's around firmware, right? So it doesn't have to be like a new firmware project. It can be tooling of firmware or documentation or whatsoever, right? So if you want to spend some time on open source firmware, on open source firmware projects, right, we try to help you and get you some money over. Yeah, that's essentially what it just says. So you can check out the link here to. That's actually the foundation website. It's osfw.foundation. There's also the OSFC linked, so the conference and also like the funding stuff, where you can get some money from. Yeah, so we got a couple of companies involved in the foundation. As I said, not all of them are actually paying money, but all of them kind of supporting the cause, and think that open source firmware is in general a good idea. However, not as good that they're giving money, but still a good idea. So if you want to get involved, right, check out the foundation website. We're always looking for people that help us, running this stuff here, going to conferences, working on projects or whatsoever, right? So if you want to get involved in open source firmware whatsoever, just drop us an email, go to the website, talk to us, and we can see actually what we can do with that. Any questions on the foundation?